Grace and peace. I'm Brian Muster, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Christian Fellowship, the peace of Jesus Christ to change our lives, and the power of the Holy Spirit to change our world. And we are continuing our summer term Bible study series with selected passages from 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. This series has been entitled Heavy is the Crown, the Rise and Fall of the Hebrew Kingdom. This is the last and final lesson, lesson 10. We're looking at the fall of the Hebrew kingdom, the fall of Jerusalem. If you are around Drexel University and you want to have this conversation in person, we will be having it Sunday, September 7th in the JEMIC at 5 p.m. This last video, the fourth video in this last lesson, A New Hope, kind of turning the page and looking at what the exile means for the rest of the Bible, especially in kind of the light of the New Testament. But before that, I kind of want to share these timelines with you. This is taken from Wikipedia, but they're fairly accurate. Like, I did not see anything wrong with them. This is kind of the fall and collapse. You see how the descent into just the exile is over several years, from 609 down to 583, when the people kill the governor Gedaliah and flee to Egypt, and several different times they get some sort of deported by the Babylonians in one direction or another. But honestly, the kingdoms of Israel and Judah have been slowly deteriorating from their heights long before this actually happened. Assyria has been in exile since 722, and the people of Judah have seen a slow decline from their glory days as well. But just, if you want to pause and just look at this, but you can also find something like this on the internet very easily, looking at the overarching sort of claims of how the Babylonians took the kingdom of Judah into exile. But that's not the end of the story. Kings ends with Jehoiachin in prison, but released from prison, no longer wearing prison robes, sitting at Arwel Marduk's table, getting an allowance, being kind of one of the most significant kings in exile, significant people at Arwel Marduk's table, being fed well, being more of a guest to the most powerful king in the world at this time. Although he is not the king in Jerusalem, there is still kind of a hope. And we know that eventually folks will start coming back. Jehoiachin is released from prison. The Persians conquer Babylon, which is a great thing. Cyrus allows Jews to return to Jerusalem, and we see Sheshbazzar start leading people back. And then Zerubbabel and Joshua, the high priest, start laying foundations for the second temple back in Jerusalem. And Zerubbabel actually becomes somewhat of a messianic figure, but then he disappears, and we're not even sure what happens to him, what his fate is. And then folks come back under Ezra, folks come back under Nehemiah, and the Jerusalem is being rebuilt over the course of a century. It's interesting, when does the exile end, or does the exile end? When would the people of Judah consider them no longer in exile? And there are people who stay in Babylon. There are Jews in Babylon in exile throughout the entirety of this, and there's still Jews in Babylon at the time of Christ. And there is this idea, and there is the diaspora of the Jewish people starts, and it never really ends. And it's fascinating to think about, when does the exile end? Is it when the first group come back? Is it when Cyrus issues the decree? Is it when the temple's back? Is it when the wall's up? Is it in the Maccabean time when they get some sort of political and just reinstate a king who actually has some sort of authority over the land? When does this idea of exile end? But the exile was promised prophetically in Deuteronomy, and the return was always promised in Deuteronomy as well. When all these blessings and curses I have set before you come on you, and you take them to heart, wherever the Lord your God disperses you among the nations, and when you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and with all your soul, according to everything I command you today, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have compassion on you and gather you again from all the nations where he scattered you. Even if you have been banished to the most distant land under the heavens, from there the Lord your God will gather you and bring you back. He will bring you to the land that belonged to your ancestors, and you will take possession of it. And this is before the exile ever happened. This is before the promised land was ever taken. This is on the way to the promised land. Both the idea of the exile is prophesied, and the idea of the return from the exile and ending of the exile is prophesied. I want to turn to some New Testament ideas and see how these things go on. Matthew seems to indicate the exile ended with Christ. In his genealogy, Matthew breaks it into three categories: from Abraham to David, from David to the exile, and from the exile, which doesn't seem to end, to the Christ. Those three things, with 14 generations in each of those categories, with the getting to the Davidic monarchy being one, from the Davidic monarchy to losing the Davidic monarchy two, and then from the loss of the Davidic monarchy to it being reestablished in the Messiah, Christ, the King of Kings, being framed there. So Matthew seems to think that the Jews were in exile until the Messiah came. Pentecost in the book of Acts is quite often framed. You can see it as an undoing of the Tower of Babel, people not understanding and languages being confused, and those confused languages are now being spoken so that everybody miraculously understands the gospel. But also it can be seen as an undoing of the Babylonian exile. We now see Jews from every land joined together in Jerusalem, hearing the good news of God for the first time, as they have been brought from where they were scattered. They've been gathered from the corners of the world to hear the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So we can frame Pentecost as an undoing of the exile. But then Peter, especially in 1 Peter, Peter sees the church scattered throughout the Roman Empire as still living in exile. Peter sees the exile as kind of an ongoing thing, or at least a good metaphor to describe what the church feels and how the church should exist in the world around them. They should not be at home. They should feel like they're foreigners, feel like they're strangers in a strange land. They should feel like somewhat similar to the Jewish people who were in exile in Babylon. So Peter uses the metaphor of the exile as a valuable way to understand the life of a Christian. And then Revelation, these ideas in Revelation chapter 7, with the 144 gathered from the 12 tribes of Israel and every nation gathered around the throne. Both of these passages are in Revelation. And then ultimately the defeat of Babylon in Revelation 19, and the calling and going into the presence of the Lamb at the marriage festival. All that is written and encased in exilic language. Babylon is used as the enemy because of the Babylonian exile. The 12 tribes goes back to like the idea that overturning the Syrian exile as well. And then every nation, instead of the Jewish people, the people of God being scattered throughout the nations, all the nations are gathered around the throne and worship of God. So there is a lot of value in the metaphoric and thematic identity or of the people of God in exile. And when the exile comes up, it is used well in the New Testament to just kind of explain who the people of God should see themselves to be. Since Deuteronomy, both the exile and the return from exile has been a prophetic expectation, and the New Testament metaphorically and thematically uses the exile to describe the church's relationship with the world and hope for, that should be heaven there, hope for heaven. There is a case to be made that the exile ends when we return to the Father in heaven, when we are in the new Jerusalem that God constructs for us. We will finally find the promised land, the place we belong in the land of God in the hereafter. So when does the exile end? It both ends here and now and not quite yet as well. And these are some questions to discuss. In what ways is the exile both already over and not yet over? What does it mean to still be living in exile? When do you think the exile will ultimately be ended, and why? And I'm not asking for eschatological predictions of the return of Christ in that one. Just kind of thematically, when do you see the exile, if it ended, or when will it end if it hasn't yet? What are you thinking around those lines? Love to hear your comments on that. Drop down in the comments section if you have anything you want to share with me. There are always two ways to join in person: Sunday nights at 5 p.m. in the JEMIC, and these weekly wrap-ups on YouTube and or WordPress. I'm all over the social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, and YouTube. Like, subscribe, and follow as appropriate. I enjoyed having this extended conversation with you through the entirety of the series. I hope you join us for the next series, which comes up in the fall. We're going to be looking at evangelism and how to share our faith through stories of our lives, and that should be a great thing. Enjoyed this with you. Hopefully I get to see you again real soon. Talk to you later.